So let's talk a little bit about a laser cutter project that I'd like to do. And basically, you get a couple of sheets of material, and we have two different kinds of material right now. And I'd like you to cut out a pattern that becomes a 3D object. So not just a flat thing, but something that needs to be assembled, ideally, something that is architectural in nature, some kind of screening wall, light fixture. There's a number of different options. So anyway, and please don't use any of the handy dandy laser cutter templates. I think I've had my fill of rhinoceroses and mooses, which you absolutely can do on your spare time. But not for me. So a couple of examples. There's a number of different panels and things that you'll see in interiors that are created using either a laser cutter or possibly this one might be a CNC machine, which basically is like an insane drill that can cut any pattern. And what's nice about it is it's really up to your imagination. If you have a cobweb in mind or something like that, you can do it. Here's an example of something that you could do called scherenschnitte, which is some kind of German silhouette historical cutout technique, which is kind of cool. This is obviously a flat image, so it doesn't have much three-dimensionality too, but very cool. But screen walls are used all over the world, but in particular in hot climates. This is a stone cutout wall, I think stone. And this is metal, and these are fun because you can get all sorts of interesting shadows. Even the kind of depth of the cutout can be very interesting. And here's kind of a close-up of one of these carved walls. Really make for very interesting interior elements, both as an object and then the fact that you can see through it and get interesting shadows. So another one that I particularly like, this is sort of my latest obsession here, is something called kiragami, which is sort of like origami, except you basically kind of take a single sheet of paper and you cleverly cut it in such a manner that when you fold it open, you get different kinds of shapes. Okay, and so this, if I folded it flat, it would just be a piece of paper with slits cut in it. But folding it open with clever folds as you open it make the shape. And there's a million examples of this. People kind of go bananas creating these things. And even something like this, which is really just a series of strips, laser cut into the paper and backlit kind of for drama. It just looks like a series of lines with irregular ends. But by cleverly opening and folding, it makes for an interesting shape. Anyway, and then there's other objects where they've cut them out of different materials and give the materials new properties. For example, this is, I believe, a particle board that they've cleverly cut, and the slits allow it to bend. Or something like this, where it's a flat object, but it can be assembled into a different sort of shape. And these can be used for any number of things: candelarias, muffin, cupcake holders, even shoes. By using a laser cutter, you can create an interesting shoe. And a fun thing that I think is easy to do relatively anyway is to create a light fixture. To do that, you really just need to cut a hole in your sheet and kind of anticipate how it's going to bend together. So, and here's another, again, some more examples showing the flat cutout pattern and then what you get when you kind of pull it apart, and how you pull it apart gets you different results. So, again, and it's kind of up to your creativity using a template kind of like this. What do you do with that shape? Is it a light shade, lampshade, or something like that? Or something that goes in front of a window, maybe, instead of a fabric in front of the window, you have these kind of interesting shapes. This is one I'd love to try. Anyway, again, once you kind of get into this zone here, you start to realize, oh, it's just a matter of kind of clever folding. So anyway, very interesting patterns. So, and I have some additional ideas on Pinterest there. You can follow the link here. and jump into Pinterest. But basically, the process here, you sketch your idea just to sort of say, well, what do you think this material might be, and how do you want it to behave? Where would it go? Then I'd like you to, and we'll do this in class, make a mock-up. Or you can do it in advance. And basically that means just grab a sheet of paper, you can take it out of the garbage, or particularly heavyweight paper that is in the print lab is nice for this. The mock-up does not have to be fancy. In fact, I'm expecting it to be a mess with tape and glue and random cuts that don't work out. But what I want you to do is just try cutting out the thing you would like to make first to see if you can cut it, bend it, fold it, tape it, in the manner which you're hoping. So anyway, once you've done that, this is an easy one. You basically just draw lines on the computer, and the laser cutter cuts those lines. So Illustrator is the easiest, and that's what I'll show here. You can actually do this in Revit. So if you happen to have like an elevation or something for a different project that you wanted to cut out, you can do that. And then we'll just cut the drawing. So it's really, if you can draw some lines, you're basically there. Laser cutting is first come, first served. The lab monitors, or me, will do the laser cutting for you. You are not allowed to use the laser cutter yourself. And obviously for you guys, what you design, it's entirely up to you. Have fun with it. It can be some sort of warpy material that is just glued to the wall, or a window, some kind of architectural screen. The scale of it is entirely up to you, but we cannot obviously put like 10-foot tall sheets of plywood in there. So obviously if it's something large, you'll have to scale it. And as part of this assignment, you will draw where you anticipate this material will go. You can draw it in elevation, or you can try and model it on the computer in 3D if you'd prefer, or in plan or ceiling plan, depending on where you're putting this thing. If you do want to use a light fixture, by the way, a medium base socket is about 1.1 inches in diameter. So if you include that whole size in your cutout pattern, it'll fit right into a handy-dandy socket that I have. And basically, when you set up the document in Illustrator, it needs to be the correct size. I have chipboard that is 16 by 12 inches, so that would be the maximum size. I have heavyweight white paper that is 16 by 11, so a little bit smaller. And just to give you some, hints here, people often want to use an image that they found on the internet. Image trace is something that you'd want to take advantage of here. I'll show you what that is. Here's a pattern that I just grabbed off the internet, and I actually grabbed one that's low resolution, so it's not particularly great. Just to show you that even something that's not so great, you can usually get Illustrator paths out of that. What you do is you go to the window pull down menu and go to image trace, and I usually call up the whole menu here. So if you select the object, because you can just do this from the object pull down menu, there's an image trace option, but the whole menu gives you kind of these presets here. I'll show you the names. You can choose what your object is. Now, in this case, it's basically a black and white thing. So if I choose something that is colors, it's going to have a cow, or at least it's going to have some trouble figuring out what the colors are supposed to be. Yeah, that's not bad, but I would recommend, depending on what kind of object image you have, trying different things. Let's see, I think I could try either line art. So if this was a sketch, see what we get. Now, that's not very good. It's converting the whole thing to lines. So let's try this one. Let's try a black and white logo. Oh yeah, that's much better. In the menu here, you can control the threshold. I'll leave the cursor up here, pixels darker than threshold value are converted to black. So what it's doing is it's looking at the pixels in the image and trying to decide which ones it wants to grab. Every image is going to be a little different, and of course the tracing result may or may not be to your liking. You can adjust these more advanced settings. The more paths, the more complex the drawing will be, but probably the more precise you're going to get with your objects. You can also add more corners. Again, it gets more complicated. Sometimes an image, a low-res image in particular, you want fewer corners. Images that have a lot of noise, you can tell Illustrator to ignore that. Finally, we're creating filled regions here, which is basically a series of lines. You could also just create the strokes. Those are stroked paths, but it's a little harder to kind of see what you're doing generally when you do that, so I'm just going to go with the fills. Anyway, you can also tell it to snap curves to lines, which for certain patterns, like this one, makes a lot of sense. If I uncheck that, probably we'll get a little bit more curviness, although I'm not actually sure I can see the difference here. In this case, it's pretty much a monochromatic image, so I'm going to go and tell it to ignore white. That does simplify the menu just a little bit. I mean, the tracing. You can see that's pretty good. By the way, I have previewed this here down at the very bottom of the menu so that I can see the difference. If you are like, hey, none of these make any difference, it's because you haven't checked preview. Anyway, once you've got it the way you like it, just click expand. Okay, and what you have when you have expanded it here, I'll just take away the fill pattern here. You basically have a series of strokes that represent the pattern that you've traced, and you can give them a color. Okay, and I'm just going to give it black. And then the stroke dimension here, right now it's just set to 1 point. I believe the dimension that we have to give it is 0.07 points. And that's pretty small, so it'll look a little gray when you don't have it selected. But that dimension is what the laser cutter needs to understand what it's supposed to cut and what it's supposed to leave alone. So, and again, the examples here I have on this lecture indicate what to do. Now, an example of a problem file, this is a really awesome looking pattern, except what happens is it's going to cut this out, but it's also going to cut this out. So what you end up with is basically all of these little pieces are separate. There's no pattern. You have to remember to leave little gaps if you want objects to remain contiguous. So, and that's why the test, the mock-up, is so important. So anyway, there's a number of ways you can fix that problem. The scissors tool in Illustrator is the easiest one. What it does is it makes openings in strokes. So it basically removes little sections of strokes. You can also move around the anchor points in Illustrator, and that helps it. Or you can just give up and choose a different design. That's another way you can do it. So anyway, as mentioned, you should not have any fill. And Illustrator will only cut lines that are set to 0.072 points, which also happens to be 0.10 inches. I think I've got my math right on that one, but stick with the points. That's the easiest way. So to get these cut, you just see Maddie or Sarah or me or whoever happens to be the lab monitors who are approved to work on the laser cutter. And you can absolutely make a test cut, and they probably will, just so you should, when you bring your file to them, stick around and they will, they'll see if it actually works. The materials I have, like I mentioned, there's a white kind of heavyweight paper, and also a thick chipboard, which is obviously less flexible because it is chipboard. But you'll have to decide what you want to use. And again, as mentioned earlier, there's kind of a series of steps. The first thing is a sketch. Just, don't start drawing on the computer till you have some vague idea. And you can sketch by hand, or you can use your computer sketching skills, whichever one you prefer. Again, just exploring the pattern is the critical thing. Then create the sketch model, and finally draw in Illustrator. The Illustrator pattern that you've created, by the way, you can use it as a pattern to draw in elevation or perspective. You can obviously create a material and bring that material into Revit or SketchUp, but yeah, as long as you're in Illustrator, you might as well just draw the elevation. So I do have a lecture recorded video on drawing elevations using Illustrator, which you might want to watch if you're a little nervous about that. But that's basically the laser cutter project for this semester.